All right. Tonight tonight's topic is capstone projects. So this is the night where we try to help you chart a course through figuring out what your capstone project is. And this is something that we're going to be doing throughout the course. So if you have no idea what your capstone project is going to be, that's good because it means you're waiting for your assessment. If you don't even really have a good handle on what a capstone project is, hopefully you'll have a better idea of that by the end of the session. So we're going to do, here's how our session's going to go. We're going to have a little bit more interaction than we did in the first session. We're going to do a little icebreaker first. I'll review the learning objectives. And then we're going to do capstone projects for a little bit. We're going to have a presentation from Josh and a presentation from Noelle. And Noelle, we didn't meet her last week. We'll have her introduce herself at the beginning, I guess maybe right after our icebreaker. And so they will be talking about the capstone projects, and we'll ask you guys to just ask any questions that you have about the capstone project. So there'll be time to raise your hand, ask questions about the capstone project. And then we're going to do the same thing with the neighborhood source assessment. So you all had the opportunity to watch the video about the neighborhood source assessment. So we'll be having a time to answer your questions about that. And then we'll actually have another time in a couple of weeks for you to ask more questions about the NSA after you've had a chance to go out in the field and try it. And then at the end, we'll be just talking about announcements and important dates. So that's how tonight is going to go. And with that, I'm going to let Francesca do our icebreaker.
Great, thanks, Suzanne. So another poll like we had in our first session. So we're gonna get to know each other a little bit with some questions. So the first one you should see on your screen right now is, how was your weekend? Were you as busy as a beaver? Did you have lots of fun like those goats? Was it super relaxing? Lots of cooking or eating like that giraffe there? More eating than cooking.
And I think I just got an infraction from Lynn. Lynn, I got an infraction for using an acronym without saying the full thing. So she said NSA, and I said so it's neighborhood source assessment is what NSA is. So lots of naps. So neighborhood source assessment. So now are we typing in what we did this weekend? Sorry.
Yeah, add in some things, add in a couple words.
Oh, poor Stacy.
All right, lots of people got outside, Jug Bay, B&A Trail, lots of football. Great. Oh, it sounds like everyone had a really good weekend. And let me see if I can show you.
Scoping out swimming holes at Gunpowder. I was at Gunpowder this weekend too. That's so funny.
All right, so really relaxing for many people, lots of fun things there. And then I have another one, which is, what kind of virtual learner are you? So this might be new to you, it might not be, so tell us kind of how you're feeling with taking this course online. Are you kind of confused, a little bit new, but you're getting there? Are you totally in your element? You've got all your gear around, you're set up, or are you a fish out of water? And if you are a fish out of water, you can email me and we can have a little session to practice Zoom or anything else. All right, we've got a pretty even split, but luckily nobody is a fish out of water. So that's really encouraging. Everyone's feeling pretty good. There, you should be able to see it now. Awesome.
Okay, so before we start the presentations, why don't we just have Noelle unmute and introduce herself really quick, and then we'll go in. Oh, I got to do the learning objectives, sorry. Noelle, why don't you introduce yourself, and then I'll do the learning objectives after you introduce yourself, because I think she was the only one that, that you guys didn't meet last week, although many of you met her during the recruitment process.
Hi, everybody. I'm Noelle Child, Program Coordinator for WSA. Glad to be here with you tonight.
Great, thanks, Noelle. So the learning objectives that we're trying to hit tonight is that we're going to review the key components of the Capstone project. We're going to talk about the difference between rainscaping and environmental literacy, and hopefully by the end you'll have a good sense of which one you might want to do. We will examine the Capstone project proposal, which is going to be sort of the form where you sort of plan your Capstone project. We're going to look at the neighborhood source assessment as a tool to identify pollution sources and restoration opportunities. And then we're going to review the two big assignments that we're introducing today that are going to be due on February 16th. So with that, let me turn it over to Josh for a quick little overview of Rainscaping Capstone project, and then Noelle will do ELIT, and then we'll have a chance to do Q&A about the capstones.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'm going to go over rainscaping. That's kind of my bread and butter here. And there's some key components to a rainscaping capstone that I just want to really highlight here. And I want to start the presentation by saying by the end of tonight, if it's not there already, there's going to be a rainscaping project scope document on the website, which will go into this in a lot more detail, especially as we get into some of the ideas of what these projects look like. But these projects should be highly visible. A good location, you know, the old adage, location, location, location is really important. Likely to be duplicated. So as you're making these actions or these projects in your neighborhood, you want them to have some legs. You want to get people excited about doing them in their own yards so that we can have a bigger impact. And then ideally, it's going to capture water as closely to where it falls. So as you think about your site, you know, you're looking at your impervious surfaces and you're going towards that. But one of the most important components to this is that it should be manageable. You really don't want to bite off more than you can chew. You know, as you go through the rainscaping process, we will definitely help navigate you to something that you can complete in your time frame. And one of the really most important parts of this course is that you should always have fun. You really don't want to get to a spot where you're frustrated or upset about what's going on with your projects. Keep those tenets in mind and you should be pretty good. So there's some required components to the rainscaping project. The first is your assessment. I believe Suzanne's going to go into a little bit more detail about that this evening. And then the project outreach, which we'll touch on a little bit here a little bit later, is a minimum of 3 outreach events per capstone or per rainscaping project. And we'll talk about some examples of those in a couple seconds here. And then of course the rainscaping project itself, which is the physical installation that goes into the ground. And then there's a reflection component to this that kind of gives you an opportunity to kind of think through the project, the ups and downs, and give us some feedback and, you know, something for you to hold on for the future. So these are some examples of rainscaping capstone projects. A lot of these are pretty self-explanatory. And as I said, the scope document that's on the website will go into these in a lot more detail, and we'll give you some suggested requirements on sizing and that sort of thing. One that I really want to point out here, though, is about the tree planting. There's opportunities to do buffers, but there's also a tree planting campaign that I want to signpost here. We're entering into the second year of a program called Replant Anne Arundel, which is really focused on restoring some of the canopy that we've lost here in Anne Arundel County. Anne Arundel County was the highest rate of canopy loss of the kind of urbanized counties in Maryland. So the county set this up. And as you work through that, you'll be teaming up with our restoration technician, Gray Brummett. And there's a few other requirements that go into that. But if you guys are interested in doing tree plantings, that would be a great path to go down. And then, as I had mentioned earlier, the components of the outreach, these can take a lot of different forms. You should have 3 of them. A presentation to a community association, maybe to the heads of your HOA, or at a monthly meeting. You can set up something at a community picnic or a fair. You know, setting up a nice little booth is always a good way to reach people. And then there can also be, you know, letter writing campaigns, articles in your community newsletter or on your website, just to kind of get the word out about your project. And then, of course, in these days, social media and email communication campaigns are also just as effective. And then you can also invite folks like myself or other professionals that can come and talk to your folks. You can set up workshops and kind of work through what the components of your rainscaping project are, or you know, some ideas about stormwater. You know, we can kind of work out what that looks like. Now, that was a lot of information right off the bat. Suzanne, you look like you have.
Yeah, yeah. I did want to add 2 quick things. So in the documents that you've received, it suggests sort of a great narrative arc, and I think that Noelle is to thank for this. But you might think of your 3 outreaches in this context. 1, to introduce yourself to your community as a watershed steward, to say, hey, I'm Lucy and I'm your watershed steward, and I just did a community assessment and here's what I found. So that might be one thing that you might do. A second thing that you might do is introduce your project. Hey, I'm Diane and I'm doing this conservation landscape, and here's why I'm doing it, and here's, you know, what you might want to know about it. And then the third you might want to do as sort of a celebration. You might want to share the results of what you did with your community and with an eye to next steps. So I always say to stewards, you know, the point of a capstone project is not to do a capstone project. The point of a capstone project is to engage your community and get them interested in doing something. So think of your outreach as for that purpose. And the other thing that I would say is that we have 2 sessions coming up let's see, on February 2nd, we've got engaging audiences. So we'll be talking a lot more about that outreach and digging into best practices for events and for social media and for other things. So we'll be digging a lot more into how to do outreach as the course goes on.
Thanks, Suzanne. And as you folks are kind of diving into the capstone form, we'll absolutely be able to help tailor what that outreach component looks like for each of your projects. So I know a lot of you are interested in going the rainscaping track route, and you know, I'm sure you guys all have my information, but I just wanted to share this here so that if you have questions or you're kind of on the fence, feel free to reach out to me. And I think with that, I'm turning everything over. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Hey, Josh, one more thing. So people get so excited when they start their assessment and they're like, oh, I have a perfect place for a rainscaping project. And so Josh or Gray will come out and do a site visit for you. Those site visits should happen sometime between mid-February and mid-March. So as soon as you finish your capstone proposal part 1, that then signals that you can contact Josh for a site visit. And I think that's in your assignment section of your capstone of the syllabus. So between mid-February and mid-March, if you have a site you want Josh to take a look at, or Gray if it's trees, you can contact them. Okay, now I'm done, and
Okay.
we can move on to ELIT, and then we'll do Q&A.
Thanks, Suzanne.
The environmental literacy track. So this track is a new track to WSA as of just a few years ago. Unlike the Rainscaping track, which has been around since the very beginning, the environmental literacy track has really just gotten underway since class 10. And the idea behind the original iteration of it was really to inspire the next generation of environmental leaders. The stewards who trained on the environmental literacy track always went on with the intention as either serving as guest speakers or teachers in classrooms to support environmental literacy topics, or they were planning to engage students in after-school clubs or youth organizations. And to not just tell you about it, but to show you, I'd like to share a little bit about one of my favorite ELIT capstone projects ever. I'm a little bit biased because Denise was trained in the same class as me, but I'm going to talk a little bit now about what Denise Peach in class 10 did for her capstone project. Denise is a teacher at Marley Glen School and Marley Elementary, Glen Burnie, and she did an amazing capstone with her students where she talked to them about erosion and stormwater. So if you go to the next slide, you can see that she started out not just by telling them about what stormwater is, but like giving them hands-on activities so they could dig into it. So in this one, what you can see on the left picture is that the kids had built a little castle out of sugar cubes, and then they poured water and different things on it. And then they got to see it basically erode and melt. And they got to have a whole conversation about the effects of erosion. So after Denise did that, and so apropos for the section that you're going to have, the content you're going to have for the second half of tonight's session, she took her students on a walk around their school so they could do a community assessment. And while they were on that walk, they discovered this one area where there'd been some new construction and there was just such a bad erosion problem. And so Denise talked to the students and she was like, what can we do to get involved and make this better? And so on the next few slides, you can see the students decided to write letters. And here are the letters that they wrote to their principal. Amazing. And some of them did posters and drew pictures, which you can see on the next slide. And the amazing thing is that this whole campaign that they launched to try to correct this issue, well, next slide, it worked. The principal responded, they put up some silt fencing so the problem area was fixed. And the most important thing of all that Denise always says is that the students learned that they could make a difference. So if you're thinking about the key components of what a fantastic educational program is, you want to engage the group to explore your topic in a fun way. And then you want to plan for the group to actually take some kind of action. And then the third step, which is so key for educational programs, is you actually take that action to promote a healthy environment. And then last but not least, super important is that moment of reflection, where you think about what the group accomplished, what they did, and then talk about next steps. So since class 10, the track has undergone some minor changes, and I wanted to share that in classes 11 and 12, there were several stewards who decided that instead of engaging kids, what they really wanted to do was create an educational program that engaged adults. And so just to give you some sketches, some examples of things that stewards in these classes have worked on. Steward in class 12 developed a living shoreline toolbox to help individuals navigate the complicated process of grant funding for living shorelines. Another steward in class 12 put together a class to engage HOA and property managers dealing with community-owned stormwater practices. And then another steward, this steward is from class 11, designed a walking tour of a restoration project to better engage and educate the surrounding community. So this is all to say, if you are planning to join the environmental literacy track and do an educational program for your capstone project, these are the next steps that I'd suggest. First next step is actually an optional one, but please reach out to me if you need to brainstorm ideas or if you're still trying to figure out if this is the right track for you. And then the next step would be identify what audience, community, or group you want to engage, and then let's talk. Because the capstone form, the way it's set up, there's a lot that you can do there, but based on the way that some things are worded, the wording might throw you off depending on what kind of group, what kind of community, whether it's a library, school, after school group that you're engaging. And I would never want this form to hinder somebody from creating a great project. Just know that the form is a guide. We've designed it to be used by the greatest number of stewards in the class possible. So if you're going the ELIT route, depending on what your project is, please just check in with me before you start filling things out so that I can know that you're on the right track and that everything you're doing is going to work towards creating that amazing project. And then my email address is there, my phone number is there. And just to clarify, because I'm not sure if this made it into the print copy of the syllabus, I do think it's been corrected for the digital version. I am going to be the main capstone mentor for stewards on this track, and Francesca is going to shadow me.
Okay, so with that, we're going to have Josh just pull down the presentation so we can see everyone's faces. I'll tell you that the presentation that you're seeing tonight is available on the class website under session 2. So if that went by really quickly and you want to go back and reference it, it's there for you. But I want to just open it up for questions. What questions do you have about the capstone project? And if you'd like to just use the raise your hand icon under the reactions tab at the bottom, you can feel free to do that. And Allison has her hand raised. And if you don't know how to do that, you can just physically wave your hand and we'll see it. So Allison, why don't you unmute yourself and ask your question, and then we'll go to Elizabeth next.
Thanks, Suzanne. Hi, everybody. I did a quick walk around of not just my neighborhood, but some in the immediate area, and was looking at some areas for possible capstone projects. And one of them is actually on City of Annapolis Parks property. So I was just wondering, is there, is it a possibility? Has anyone ever worked on city or county property for one of their capstone projects? And is that feasible within the time frame that we have?
Josh, go ahead and take that.
The short answer is yes and no. I think we'd have to look at the scope of the whole thing. And that's something, Allison, I think we can talk about offline, but for everyone else, that's definitely a consideration. And that's a really important consideration to take into account right off the bat, is who is in charge of making the capital improvements permissions on those sites. So sometimes you open up a can of worms and there's a whole lot of bureaucracy. And sometimes it's really easy. So, we can kind of dive in a little bit and see how that looks, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility.
Also, one of the big roles of WSA is to create connections between local government and constituents. And so we can certainly help you grease that conversation. And we actually have a session late in the course about local government connections, but we'll want to get you connected before. So we'll go Elizabeth, then Elmer, Jim, Diane, then Lynette. And I'll remind you. So Elizabeth, go for it.
So talking about connections, if you wanted to do a project in your community and engage high school students or middle school students that have to do community service, can you help us get that project validated so their hours would count, or do you know anything about that you can share?
Noelle, you want to field that one?
I think in the past, students have usually provided us with paperwork that we can sign off on. But we'd be happy to talk through how that process can work.
I was thinking if I knew, then I could use it as a carrot to get them involved.
Yeah, we can talk offline about ways that could happen.
Okay, thanks.
And I would also add, keep in mind that we are pretty well entwined with the public school system in the county. So we definitely can utilize some of those connections, speaking of connections.
That's what I was hoping, thanks.
All right, Elmer.
Yeah, I'm really kind of stuck between two different possible the educational type programs really, I think, is where I need to go. One is, and both of them are going to take a lot of time to really get very far on, so I don't know how suitable they're going to be. But the two I have are my own church, which is a blue whale if we can pull it in. It's a 42-acre campus with a lot of needs and a lot of things that actually they're required by the county to do, but horrible communication problems. So I have relatively good communications one-on-one, but it's when it goes into a group environment that it just sort of fizzles out, and suddenly things are not going down the right way. So I don't know if I want to do that. The one I really have a passion for even more than that is anyone working with Crofton High yet? Has anyone thought about that?
Noelle, go ahead.
I'm not aware of anybody engaging with
I would
Crofton High
love
yet.
to try that. I have a passion for those type of places, and I've worked with those in the past in my professional career. And you know, it'd be nice to have a team on that. And in fact, it's kind of what I'm thinking. I'd love to see.
Sounds like you're going to follow up with Noelle.
Say again.
Sounds like you're going to follow up with Noelle on those two things. And for
both are long-term projects. That's kind of my concern. You know, how much success we can gain in just a couple of months. I think there's a long-term great possibility, but we're looking at probably years rather than months. So anyway.
Yeah, so that's a good point, Elmer. You know, your capstone project is a point of beginning, and they'll be, you know, hopefully will open the doors to lots and lots of other great things. So those that don't know, Noelle not only is our ELIT specialist, she also works with congregations and heads up our Riverwise congregations program. So anyone working on a congregation site might want to check in with her as well. So with that, Jim, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. So when you come out and kind of do the assessment or evaluate our assessment and propose locations, if they're kind of in a tight geographical area, is it okay to have a couple, 3 options to evaluate which one would be the best?
That's a great question. And typically, as you work through the capstone project, it'll give you in certain sections, you know, what are, you know, some examples of projects that could happen. And, you know, typically when we're setting up the site meeting, you know, I'll talk to you on the phone, we'll work through some of those details, and we might be able to tease out better options than what, you know, what would be there, but we can be efficient with that. We can definitely take a look at things.
Yeah, appreciate it.
All right, and Diane and then Lynette.
Hi, everyone. It's kind of the flip side of the first question, which was asking about the appropriateness of capstone projects for public land. What about the idea of capstone projects on private land? Is that something that has happened before? Is that possible? Is it discouraged? Because I'm asking because I've got some ideas about the marina where we have a couple of boats, and it is privately owned, but it is right on the mouth of the Magathie, and just has a lot of pervious surface and et cetera, et cetera. So I'll just mute myself and listen to your answer.
Go ahead, Josh.
That's a great question. And we do projects kind of all over the place. Privately owned is great. Some things you might run into with that might be some funding problems. But a lot of the times when we work with private situations like that, we try to get whoever's in charge to put some skin in the game. So we can talk about working with them to try to get some funding in, and then we can kind of work through that. But that's definitely not out of the realm of possibility, especially if, you know, as you think through a rainscaping project, visibility is really important. So it sounds like that would reach a lot of folks.
Lynette, go ahead. Lynette D, I think.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So many questions. Which one to pick? I guess I'm a little confused about, I mean, I get the environmental literacy versus rainscaping and theoretically, but some of the examples that we viewed in the videos, there's overlap. So if you pick environmental literacy, they were also doing, I believe they did a rain garden together or something. And so, you know, in trying to figure out, I think our most important thing right now is to figure out which track we're going on. I mean, I hope we're not deciding what we're going to do yet, because I don't feel like we have enough information. So I guess, what is the, I mean, I guess I'm having a hard time deciding what's the difference between the two. If you take an environmental literacy track and you do a project with those kids or those adults, I don't know.
Lynette, I think the simplest way to think about the difference between the two tracks is that the rainscaping track, the project is always an in-ground project by the end. That's what you can think of as the big deliverable. Whereas for the environmental literacy track, what we're looking for is an educational program that, you know, in the past has engaged kids K through 12, but now we think about a little bit more loosely and has the potential to engage adult audiences or mixed generation audiences, what have you. So it's very true that an excellent rainscaping project is going to also have a strong environmental literacy component to it, because when you engage your community in outreach, you're going to want to be educating folks. And it's lovely when it works out that an environmental literacy project can also sometimes have an in-ground component, so people can take action and do some hands-on stuff. But, you know, those are really the distinctions. I would encourage people who are feeling like, oh, I'm so pulled and I think I have this great idea, but it seems like I'm right in the middle. Please get in touch with me so we can chat about options. Over the last 2 years, there have been stewards who have really done almost what you can think of as a hybrid. Sometimes, in some cases, they've leaned more rainscaping than ELIT. In other cases, they've really straddled both. But I'd be happy to talk through options with people and just let you know, based on the project you're thinking about, what it feels like a good capstone would be for the scope of the class.
Okay.
Great. So we've got 3 hands raised and a couple more hands that are raised on the chat. What we're going to do is we're going to take Kate, Jan, and Stacy, and then we're going to move on to the next section. Those that still have questions, there'll be the option to either stay after at 7 o'clock and keep talking, or you can feel free to email your question to myself, Josh, or Noel, and we'll answer it by email. And we might just actually CC everyone so everybody sees all the questions in case it's helpful. So Kate, go ahead and ask your question, and then Jan, then Stacy.
Hi. I guess I just have a bit of a broader question, and if you're going to answer this later, I apologize and just you can ignore me. But after watching the videos and after going through this part here, I guess I'm just a little bit confused about, like, what are we supposed to be doing now? Is this the time where we go out, we can print the community assessment, we know, okay, we live here, 1 or 2 mile radius, we fill out those forms, and like that's what we're doing? I'm like a list person, so I'm just kind of wondering what the next, what
Kate,
I'm supposed to be focusing on now.
You and I are kindred. I need to have a list too. So I actually have a list for you guys at the end of this session. So yes, everyone should be going out to do the neighborhood assessment. If you, so everyone's going to try the neighborhood source assessment regardless. If you're on the rainscaping track, that's going to put you on track to start answering your capstone proposal part 1. If you're on the ELIT track, you're going to check in with Noelle, and she's going to give you a better idea of like what kind of assessment is best for you based on what project you're doing.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Jan.
Well, I am thinking about the ELIT track, and the thing that does concern me is the assessment, because I'm thinking, do I do the assessment at the site that I might be working? Let's say that's libraries or senior centers. And it sounded like you just said, no, everybody has to do the neighborhood assessment.
Well,
yes,
everyone's going to try the neighborhood source assessment just for grins.
Okay.
So that you understand how to do it, but Noelle's going to jump in and say.
But Jan, I owe you an email I think. And let's talk, because I want to make sure that whatever community you end up doing the assessment for is a close enough match to who you think you'll be working with for your capstone, that you won't be duplicating work.
Yeah, that makes good
So
sense.
we'll make that happen.
Okay, that sounds fine. I'll be in touch. Thank you.
All right, Stacy, and then we'll move on to the next part.
Hi, mine's quick two-part. First of all, Jeannie and I live in Cape St. Clair, and as I think you're familiar with, is about 2,500 homes. Do we just pick a section of our neighborhood?
Yep.
Like maybe like around the area where our project would be the best kind of assessment. I think that's kind of on the lines
Yep.
is what Jan was talking about. And then part two, my intended project before I even signed up and became a candidate is a fairly larger project. So I might think I need to talk with Josh before like we do a site visit and kind of give him the scope. Is that something I should do? It's on community property. It's infested with bamboo that we've hand cut down. And then there's some stormwater issues coming from the yacht yard next door that I would want to do storm. So it'd be kind of a combination of like probably bioswale / conservation landscape. But it would be a pretty large scope. And I do think I have pretty good support of the community association. So.
Yep, Stacy, we can definitely talk about that offline.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Josh.
Yep.
All right, so Josh, if you want to put up the next part of the presentation, I just wanted to really quickly go through the capstone form. And I know you saw this, I'm going to go through really quickly, but there's part one of your form is going to be due February 16th, and there's a couple different parts to it. The first is just your general information, your name, your community, and are you working with another steward? And I wanted to say that if you live in the same community as another watershed steward, you guys can feel free to work together and we can talk about what that means for you. Go ahead, next slide. The next assessment, the next part of part one is your general community assessment. So you just want to read the questions and fill them out to the best of your ability. If you have questions about, what any of the questions mean, we can certainly talk offline about that. But the next slide is what I wanted to talk about, your social assessment. So there's two parts to the assessment for your capstone project. The social assessment is about the people. And we're going to do something called qualitative research, qualitative social research. And basically it's just asking people questions, and you're going to pick 5 to 7 people who live in your community. And again, your community as defined. And for those of you in a neighborhood, that's a little bit easy. For those of you on the ELIT track, talk to Noel before you do your social assessment, so you make sure you're asking the right people the right questions. But essentially, you're going to pick 5 to 7 people in your community, and you're going to ask them all the questions in the social assessment. And you're going to just sort of summarize the answers. And you're going to start hearing some repetition once you start interviewing a couple of people. So if you have questions about this, we'd like you to complete this by around February 9th, because we're going to talk about it in our steward learning pods, and it's going to be part of your capstone form that's due on February 16th. So we will help you. We just want people to share their general impressions. So that's the social assessment. And then the environmental assessment, again, you're going to be using the neighborhood source assessment and the GIS mapping application, which will be next class, to get the answers to this part. And again, if you're ELIT, the NSA might work for you and it might not, and Noel will help you fill out this part. So that's what's going to be due on February 16th. And again, we're going to be discussing the social assessment part of it during the learning pod on February 9th. So you don't have to turn it in, you just want to have it done so you could share with your class a little bit about your impressions. All right, next slide. Okay, time for another poll. We're going to switch gears to talking about the neighborhood source assessment. So go ahead, Francesca. So how do you, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so I just want to kind of get a gauge on how you feel. So you saw the presentations, you read the materials. How do you feel about conducting a neighborhood source assessment? Do you think you're ready? Are you very far from ready? Go ahead and answer here so we can get a good picture of that. All right, almost everybody's answered. A couple more.
While Francesca's getting the results, I just want to say about the neighborhood source. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to hit that.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so we have a pretty good mix. Luckily, not too many people are very confused, but we can definitely work and help you get there. So yeah, we've got a few people that are just ready, they're done, they're experts, and we've got a lot in the middle. So we'll make sure you're ready to conduct this.
Great. So if you want to go to the neighborhood source assessment is really, it's really one of those things where once you do it, you'll be like, oh, duh, that was easy. But it can be overwhelming to try to like look at all the words on the form and try to translate it. But Noelle was reminding me that it's really good to think about the neighborhood source assessment with the end in mind. So the source assessment asks you to make all of these observations and generalizations about your community, and they're all for the purpose of not making the observations. It really makes no difference if you get the exact percentage of impervious surface or grass or turf. You just want to, I love Lauren's cat is going to be a great student here. You just want to get some general trends about the community. And those trends will help you to identify the kinds of projects that would be easily able to be duplicated in your community. I'm going to give you one for instance, and then we'll get to questions. So for instance, if you're really jazzed about doing a rain garden in your community, and you do the neighborhood source assessment, and what you find is that there's very little space for rain gardens. You know, as you're walking around, you're seeing very hilly, lots of trees, and you know that rain gardens really need to be on flatter areas with, you know, you're not digging under the tree roots. And if you don't understand what I'm talking about now, you might want to just go back and remind yourselves, review Josh's Rainscaping 101 presentation before you do your NSA, and that'll remind you. But if you have a lot of tree canopy and no really areas for that where there's room for rain gardens, then you don't want to do a rain garden for your capstone project. You know, if you are seeing a lot of pet waste around that's not being picked up, then that might cue you in. Maybe I want to do something with pet waste. If you see very little tree canopy, you might want to do a tree project. So we're just trying to, this form just wants you to make general observations that will help narrow the type of project. It's not going to help you identify a specific project, but it will narrow that down to the type of project. So let's go to the next slide. And I think this is where we're going to do some Q&A. And before we get rid of this this slide, I just wanted to say that I'd like everybody to go out and try the neighborhood assessment. And you can try it with you can bring your spouse, your child. If you have a watershed steward that lives in the class that's not too far away and you guys want to social distance and you help them do their community and they help you, it's sort of fun to go out with more than one person. We'd like you to just go out and try it. Sometime between now and February 2nd, it doesn't mean you have to finish it, but on February 2nd, if you've been out in the field and you've gotten a chance to practice, you'll then be able to bring your questions back to your learning pod and say, when I did this, you know, here's what I saw, and I don't know if I got this right. And it'll be a time to do questions and answers and make sure that you really understand how to do that assessment. And plus, you'll be on your way to answering part of your capstone project form. So with that, let's take off the slide and we'll just do some Q&A, same thing. So Evan, is that
Nancy.
Diane Evans?
Nancy.
Nancy, okay, I see Edwin Evans.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Nancy, and then we'll do Jim and then Allison.
Okay, I have a very easy question, I think. I haven't lived in my neighborhood very long, and it's really not a community, it's a street. And there are expensive houses and not so expensive houses, but there's no HOA, there's no community center. So how would I decide where this community started and stopped? And what is the community? And there's no mayor or anybody to talk to.
Yeah, so in areas where you don't have like a specific neighborhood, you just have to pick a geographic area that you think people in that area might think, oh, we're in the same area or community, and just draw your own boundary and say, you just can identify for yourself, this is what I think my community is. And likewise, if you live in a gigantic community like Cape St. Clair, you're just going to pick a portion of it.
Okay.
So you can identify yourself, and the community, I would say, number of homes, it really varies. Some people have had communities as small as 10 homes and some 50 to 100 to 500. It's really up to you what you want to identify as your community. There's pros and cons to working with smaller or bigger areas.
But there's no one you need to get permission from to do this?
Nope.
Okay.
You're not going on anyone's property. You're just making observations. That said, it is a great practice to, if you have a neighborhood listserv and you can say, hey, I'm Nancy and I'm taking this class and I'm going to be out walking around the neighborhood. You might see me and here's what I'm doing.
Okay.
That's a nice thing to do if you can do that. Jim McNichol.
Hi there. So I'm just trying to get this straight in my mind here. We will have a social assessment for our capstone project, and you want that by the 9th of February. And we have a NSA due February 2nd. And then you mentioned 2 assignments, 2/16. Will you be listing these due dates and assignments on our weekly summary so we can kind of keep track of it?
Yeah, so Jim, thanks for saying that. We actually have a slide that breaks this down, but basically there's only 2 assignments that you have to turn in.
Okay.
They're both due February 16th and they're both in the syllabus.
Okay.
It's the capstone proposal part 1 and your community presentation. Those are the 2 things that you actually have to turn in.
Okay.
But what we thought is that it might be nice if you had a chance to discuss some of the skills that you were needing to do in order to answer the first part of your capstone proposal. So your capstone proposal includes the social assessment, the environmental assessment, for which most of you are going to do the neighborhood source assessment. So as you're out there doing all of the parts that you need to do in order to get to February 16th, we thought it would be nice to give you an opportunity to talk about it with your learning pod. So we identified a couple of dates where you could just talk about it. So if you have that social assessment done by February 9th, you guys will be able to chew on it and talk about it. You don't have to turn anything in. It's just nice to have some experience doing it. Does that make sense?
Got it.
Okay, good. All right, Allison, I think Allison was next, and we'll do Mary and then Lynette, and then I think we'll move on from this part.
Great. So I had a question. If I remember from the video correctly, the NSA is based on, some of the specifics about percentages of different land cover types. based on a sample of like 5 to 6 properties. But it wasn't clear to me, are we filling out a form for each one of the properties we're looking at? Or are we trying to like say the average of the 5 to 6 properties that we looked at was 30% impervious?
You got it. You're looking for a trend. And I have to tell you, I get hives when someone asks me to estimate, like to look at a property and estimate how much impervious surface versus turf. I hate that part. And I can't do it just looking at it. I have no idea how to answer. And so next week, we'll be showing you how to use the GIS system to do that on a couple properties. And then you'll get the feeling, okay, I'm in the right ballpark. I know what 30% impervious looks like. I know what 20% lawn looks like. So you can really easily do it on the GIS and then get a nice confirmation.
A quick follow-up, will the GIS also be what we're using to get some of the other information about demographics?
Yes and no. The demographic information in your social assessment, if you're in an incorporated town, you can get that just through census data, but you can also use it as one of your interview questions. What do people think the demographics are?
Okay.
All right. Mary and Lynette, I don't remember who was first, but we'll take the two of you.
Actually, my question was building off Allison's. Similarly, trying to think, I have a 63 home community, roughly how many properties should I look at to do the NSA? So one thought would be, my community is in 2 watersheds, and I've always kind of thought about dividing my community into like 3 or 4 quadrants. So perhaps for the NSA, I might do like 8 properties, 2 in each quadrant, so I can kind of see if there's any trends across, those subsets. Any suggestions?
I think that's a great suggestion. One of the things with the NSA that you can do is divide your community up into sections, and you might get a greater or lesser pollution index or
Right.
restoration opportunity index. So I think that's a great thing to do. You
I
can
thought
sort
it
of
might,
focus yourself.
it might even focus me on an area that might have higher needs that I didn't realize because I never really looked at the granular details on this that are on this form. Okay, thank you.
Awesome. And Lynette, did you still have a question, or did we already answer yours?
I think you answered most of them. I think what you're saying is this assessment should always be of a neighborhood regardless. Like I right now am not planning to do the project in my neighborhood. I'm planning to do it at my library workplace, but I don't know. But I assume this assessment is just of your neighborhood regardless of where your project is going to be. Because we keep referring to, so you'll know where you want to do your project. But if you're not doing your project in the neighborhood, I'm a little confused about the assessment part.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. So we want you to do, we don't want anyone to do any busy work. So you should definitely do the assessment. We want everyone to try the assessment, right? If you can do the assessment in the community surrounding the library, sometimes that's a good idea so that you can begin to understand, a little bit about the patrons. But I would suggest chat with Noelle, poor Noelle, chat with Noelle, because it sounds like you're maybe doing the ELIT track and she might be able to help you suggest a good area to do the NSA on. Okay, let's go to the next part. So this is so there are 2 assignments. Jim, thanks for helping to clarify that you have as part of this course that are going to be due on February 16th. And the 2 assignments are so related, and they're all about what's your community like. So one assignment we talked about earlier is your capstone proposal part 1. So everybody should have a good idea of what that is. And essentially you're going to take the information that is in capstone part 1, and you're going to make a presentation out of it. And you're going to share that presentation with your classmates so that everybody can get an idea of what's going on in other people's communities. And so that's also going to be due on the 16th. And we have both instructions and a template that are in your Google Drive, and they're also PDFs of those are also on the class website. So in your Google Drive, you'll see the instructions for the presentation and the template. And basically it's maybe 7 slides, and it's going to summarize your assessment. So you're gonna have a slide on your community, you know, what is your community? And a slide on the social assessment. What did you find out by talking to people in your community about what they care about? What's important to them? And then you're going to have a slide on the environmental assessment. You know, what are the pollution sources and the opportunities for restoration? And then a slide on what you think you might do for your capstone project. You don't need to have it. Anyway, you'll do this very, very simple PowerPoint presentation. And then you're going to be sharing it with your learning pod. About half of you are going to go the week of the 16th, half of you will go on the week of the 23rd. And you'll just be giving that presentation to the rest of your learning pod. And then additionally, we're going to be able to post those on the class website. And so you'll be able to visit people's that you didn't get a chance to see, and you'll be able to give comments. So this is a good way to sort of learn about other people in your class, see what their observations are, and also connect with people whose communities are similar, whose capstone projects are similar. And because this presentation is going to be posted on the class website without the benefit of your verbal accompaniment, we suggest that unlike typical presentations where you want to be really picture heavy with few words, you can really put as much text as you want because people will really read these slides rather than hearing you present about them. So, so that's a really quick summary. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let you read the assignment, look at the template, and then next class, we can ask questions about the assignment. So just know that the assignment is there, read through it, and then we'll have a Q&A time about those presentations next week. So the slide you've all been waiting for, Kate, this one's for you. Kate and Jim, this one's for you. This is your what's next. So again, there's two assignments, Capstone Part 1 and the presentations. Both of those are in your Google Drive folder, and they're both due February 16th. All you have to do is save them back in your Google Drive folder to turn them in. But we're going to help you sort of chew on and get ready for those assignments in your learning pod. So February 2nd, again, you're going to share your experience of using the NSA form at that learning pod, and hear other people's experience and ask questions and see, I didn't understand this or I didn't understand that. You can always ask us questions in between, but it's sort of nice to do it with a small group. And then February 9th, the same thing, we're going to share our assessment or our experience doing the social assessment. So you'll be able to share a little bit about what the people in your community are thinking, what they're concerned about. So that'll just be a time of sharing. So those are the important dates. And next slide. Okay, couple of things. At the end of this class, you can go to the class website and you'll see the presentations and documents from this session, and you'll also see the assessment. If you go ahead and take the assessment tonight or tomorrow, we'll be able to get a handle on how people are doing, what questions they have. And if you haven't taken last week's assessment, go ahead and do that. If you have burning questions that you're not getting the answer to, please, please, please reach out to me, Josh, Francesca, Noel, as appropriate. And we love, love, love hearing from you. So if you have questions in between, feel free to ask them. If you haven't already paid your tuition, just a reminder about that. And then most of you saw our annual conference. Registration is open. You guys are in our certification course, so you get to register for $10. If you would like to go, it's March 5th and 6th, and it's online. Hopefully you got an email with the registration link and the information about the conference. But if you have any questions, Francesca is coordinating the conference, so you can feel free to ask her. And then last, I'm going to ask Josh to tell you what's up next week.
Yeah, so as you guys dive into the Session 3 website, you're going to see there's a lot of videos there to explore, and they're all centered around GIS and the county's mapping application. I just want to signpost right now out of the gate that the website that you're going to be investigating in the next week is going to be changing. I don't know if we're anticipating major changes, but with that in mind, I don't want anyone to get too scared of it. I want everyone to have fun with it. This is a really great tool that is in the tool belt of the steward. And really in the next week, as you're kind of diving in, just have fun and play with it. You might want to put in your home address and kind of go from there and see what you find out. With that being said, though, I will have a GIS comfortability assessment under the Reflect section of Session 3. And I'm asking folks to fill that out by next Monday, the 25th, so that we can kind of assess where everyone is and get people into some groups for Session 3.
The thing I would add to that is that for those of you that live in the city of Annapolis, we're sorry. There is some data available for the city of Annapolis on the county's mapping application, but it's certainly not as sophisticated as the county's information. We hope that one day the city will publish their data, and I think we're closer to that than we have been in the past. But just a caution about if you live in the city and you wonder why you can't find your information, that's why. And again, that GIS website is going to change, but we wanted to give it to you and at least allow you to start learning the concepts and be able to make your NSA maps. So we'll teach you how to do that next week. So here we are, 7 o'clock, actually 7:01. For those that want to stick around for some extra discussion, there's a poll about extra discussion, what you're interested in discussing. And for those that want to move on with your night, thank you for your kind attention and for being here. And please, please, please feel free to reach out to us in between if you have other questions.